Mike, thanks very much. It's great to be here this morning. I'm just so pleased by the turnout. Of course, as you all know, literally 2 years ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, setting off a really tragic series of events. Many of you here know a lot more than I do about warfare. And so I'm not giving you any news about how awful, especially the initial phases were in towns like Bucha. But it continues to be a horrible event. You know, there's an ancient curse. May you live in interesting times. It's not a Chinese one. Everybody thinks it is Chinese, but it's probably got its origins somewhere in the West. But we certainly do live in interesting times with two major conflicts going on. One, of course, in the Middle East, and all kinds of associated things with that. But the one I'm going to talk about today, obviously, is the one in Ukraine. In thinking about how to address the topic, I mean, it's so huge. You talk about any war, you've got to figure out some kind of analytical framework in order to make sense of it. And so one thing I thought would be a good approach is to look at the different levels of this conflict at the national, regional, and global levels. And when I started to do that, I realized that all these are strongly related to each other. No surprise there. But that the interactive effect of these several levels of the international system have produced probably the most consequential event of this century so far. And that really is the thesis. That's the thesis of the talk.
Try talking into this one and that on for a second. We're getting a very loud buzz in the other room. But they said when I was talking, they didn't.
Use this? Okay. I'll try to keep the water in my left hand and the mic in my right. And then also at the same time, push the thing so the slides change. We'll see how that works. Can you still hear me okay? All right. Anyway, this is probably the single most consequential event on the global stage so far this century. We shall see what happens in the Middle East and also what happens in U.S.-China relations, which are kind of hanging out there as a possibility. Doesn't matter.
There you go.
Okay.
Talk loud.
You want me to talk loud? That's not a problem. That's not a problem. Anyway, it probably is the most important event of this century. And before I get into sort of looking at this national, regional, and global level, there's a couple of things here, and I don't want to insult anybody by portraying that. That this is just to remind you of the geography, which I always find handy, of what's going on. You can see this 600-mile front, which is quite long, I think, and what's in black there is where Russia had occupied before the invasion, before February 24th. 2022. And the bottom part there is Crimea, which they had occupied in 2014 with their little green men that they sent in and with barely firing a shot they occupied the whole Crimean Peninsula. So they thought from the beginning, well, this is going to be a piece of cake. When to get the rest of the country, they learned that it wasn't. And I'll get into that more in a second. Another thing, sort of context I wanted to give you is, again, no news for many of you out here. War is a slog, and this war is no exception. What you can see here is a portrayal of how much in blue Ukraine was able to gain by January 1st, and in red how much Russia was able to gain. And it looks like Russia did really well, but in fact, when you look below that, you can see that the number of square miles gained by Russia isn't really very much at all compared to, say, New York City or Kiev even. It just isn't much. And while they're gaining more today, those of you who follow it in the papers will see that Russia has been able to advance somewhat here, and I'll show you this map as well, what Russian gains have been. Can you see that okay? Okay. Well, you can see that, for all the hoopla that it's getting in the press around Avdiivka, we really haven't gained much territory at all. They're working now, the Russians are, and I heard they've positioned something like 40,000 troops around a little village to the south of Avdiivka called Robotnia. And it's a town of about 2,000. But now they've got all these troops, and so now they're standing off each other. This is clearly a war of attrition. And I'm thinking really more about World War I than World War II. Although there were certainly aspects of World War II that were a war of attrition, this World War I is probably a better example of that, where troops just get together and blast the hell out of each other. And that's what's going on now. So these are the points of contact where the Russians have decided to see if they can advance from along this line. Well, when we take a look at the national level of conflict, I think it's helpful to zero in on what it's meant for Russia first, and Russian foreign policy. What we see when we take a look at that, I think, is that the Russians made terrible strategic and tactical mistakes in invading Ukraine. They've learned lots of lessons about the use of force. Whether they're adapting to those lessons or not, in the future we shall see. But they made several assumptions that proved disastrously wrong. One of which, of course, is that the Ukrainians would just buckle under. And when they invaded from Belarus, which is from the north of Ukraine, they figured this is going to be a piece of cake, because just think about Crimea, which was easy, that I mentioned before. And so they sent in a long line of tanks that were not at all protected by infantry. Those of you who've been in battle understand you've got to protect your tanks. Well, they didn't even bother doing that. Not only that, but they brought in suitcases with their dress uniforms. So that 3 days after they invaded, their plans say, and I've seen the documents, they were going to be involved in a big military parade in Kiev and greeted by the native Ukrainians as a victorious force, saving them from what? I'm not sure. But that is exactly what's in the documents. Can you imagine? That's called hubris.
Capital H.
Yeah, capital H is right. So there was no quick victory there, but they assumed there would be. That's assumption one. Assumption two was that the Europeans and Americans might protest, but you know, they really wouldn't do very much. Now, it's true that at first, many governments in Europe were shocked by the invasion. The Americans and some of its allies were not quite as shocked because our intelligence, I understand, had caught on about a couple of months beforehand that this was really going to happen. We just didn't know exactly when. But shock there was. And however, the Western forces were able to rally and organize themselves. Probably one of the biggest failures of Russian policy in this, looking at this second assumption, was to imagine that NATO was just going to kind of do nothing. Well, guess what? NATO not only did something by providing arms, NATO countries did, but they added to their membership. First came Finland, a country that has had tense relationship with, you can call it the Soviet Union or you can call it Russia, for a long, long time. Okay? And those of you who know your military history will remember the infamous Winter War that the Finns got involved in and gave the Russians, the Soviets, I should say, a bloody nose. But eventually the Soviets won and were able to capture some territory to protect what was then called Leningrad. But Finnish policy has been just to kind of get along with that mighty neighbor, you know, to the east. Almost neutrality. Yet in July last year, the Finnish parliament voted to join NATO. And they were going to do it together with Sweden, except for one problem, which was Turkey. And Turkey and then Hungary joined together to sort of block admission of Sweden to NATO. Sweden wanting to get into NATO just alone, whether they could do it or not, is simply astounding, given Swedish foreign policy. They were neutral in World War II. But no more. Thanks to this invasion, the Swedes overwhelmingly wanted to join. Swedish parliament voted to join, but then they were blocked by, anybody know? Hungary. Good old Viktor Orban. And he's been blocking it and blocking it and blocking it. Yesterday, he said, I'm not going to block it anymore, and he's going to give it to the Hungarian parliament to approve the admission of Sweden to NATO on Monday. So that's new. So now NATO, as of Monday, will consist, well, NATO itself has to do it. But anyway, NATO is going to be 32 countries. And this is all thanks to Mr. Putin. Therefore, I thought, yes.
Why does Hungary care of Sweden?
Why does Hungary care? Well, Viktor Orban, Hungary itself contributes about 1% of overall GDP in the European Union. 1%, it's tiny. It's got an army of about 40,000, which is very small. So it's really not consequential from a power politics point of view. But because NATO requires unanimity for admissions, if one country holds out, and that's been Hungary, they can kind of bargain and get what they want, and guess what? Viktor Orban was able to get 4 brand new jet fighters made by the Saab company from Sweden, and plus 10 other used ones. Plus, the Swedes were going to establish a research institute in chip making in Hungary. And the Swedish prime minister visited Hungary over the last few days. giving Orban kind of, he's kind of full of himself, to put it mildly. Kind of this prestige of being courted by the Swedish prime minister. So finally, after all of this, he got his military stuff, he got his personal uplift, which, by the way, was the whole reason for his holding out in the first place. Although he phrased it in terms of Hungary's national interest, he's just kind of an autocrat. Anyway, so that's what happened, and so now that's terrific. So I thought about this for a while, and I thought, gee, I think Vladimir Putin deserves an award. and so that's the award. That's the award. He's got, obviously, this is a doctored photo. But he got the award for Finnish and Swedish accession into NATO. But, it still makes the point, doesn't it, that Finland and Sweden wouldn't have really pushed for NATO membership unless the Russians hadn't invaded Ukraine. So, thank you, Mr. Putin, for that. NATO is stronger than it was before. And NATO is a very strong deterrent against Russian aggression. And the Poles are particularly happy about that because they think they would be next. We don't know, of course, it's impossible to know if that's true or not. I think Russian resources, in fact, are limited. So anyway, I hope that we don't test that to see if it happens. Okay, assumption 2. Okay, assumption 1, West NATO wouldn't do anything. Assumption 2 is, oh, wait a minute, this is assumption 3, I'm sorry. Assumption 3 is that the Russian army successfully reformed itself. These are all these big mistakes that Russia has made. They had, after they invaded Georgia, the country of Georgia, where I happen to have spent a wonderful 6 months there teaching, they invaded the country of Georgia in 2008. For a very brief conflict, 5-day conflict, which they took 20% of Georgian territory and then stopped. But that was a real disaster for Russia because it shouldn't have taken 5 days. I mean, it was just this. Georgia's a really tiny country, and 3.5 million or so. Ukraine is 40 million. But Russia couldn't deal very effectively with that. Tanks broke down, Jeeps got flat tires, and they didn't have any extra tires to fix them. I mean, it was just awful. So the Russians said, well, we're going to reform our army, and instead of having, these big kind of bulky forces that we've had with tanks and, out of shape commanders, big fat guys, couldn't really march very far. And, said, well, we're going to have mobile, we're going to do a mobile armed forces, and we're going to really get in there and do it. But they didn't. Instead, they continued to have problems of non-commissioned officers, which all of you know. The NCOs are really the heart of any fighting force, advising sometimes way too young lieutenants who are in charge of a lot of the fighting, supposedly, but these sergeants are right in there with the knowledge. Russia doesn't have very many of them, and that continued. The reform didn't fix really anything. And in addition, Putin and his people came to depend upon a mercenary force, which is called the Wagner Group. You probably have heard of that, named after the composer Wagner. I'm going to see an opera tonight, actually, Wagner opera. So it set itself up really as a competing force, this mercenary force did, competing with the Russian army in Ukraine. And of course, eventually, Evgeny Prigozhin, who led this force, decided that he was more important than the Russian army was, and he actually tried to march north. You remember that? He was marching north, and to take over the Ministry of Defense is what he said. Putin did not quite see it that way. He was afraid of his own hide, Putin was. And so Putin pretended to give in and let Prigozhin and his people go to Belarus and set up camp there. But 1 month later, Mr. Prigozhin met an accident. His plane exploded. Somehow, taking not only Prigozhin with him, but the commander of these Wagner forces. It's clear, after looking at these three failed assumptions and what Russia has done, that Putin really has no strategy to win except pummeling Ukraine. Now, those of you who studied military history and maybe even have read some of the works of Sun Tzu or Karl von Clausewitz will know that there's no point to war if there's nothing to take after you've conquered your enemy. I mean, you got to have something. But as you know from reading the newspapers, there doesn't seem to be a strategy to have something left over after you win. Go back to World War I, the Treaty of Versailles so weakened Germany, and Germany was so badly destroyed there was almost nothing left. But you saw what happened in the wake of that. Anyway, so Putin has no real strategy, it seems to me. So that should put an end to the myth of Putin as this great tactician and strategic thinker. He's made huge mistakes. And the result of it is, of course, that Ukraine itself is more unified, or became more unified than it ever was before. Exactly the opposite of what Putin wanted. Now, there's plenty of reports coming out of Ukraine that things are going on politically in Ukraine that are disrupting the country's unity, somewhat anyway. And if you want, we can talk about that later on. Now, none of this means that the Russians have lost or are going to lose. Nothing I've said before means the Russians have lost or will do so. They remain stronger than Ukraine, objectively speaking. Look at the size of the country. They have 4 times the population. So they can continue to pour people into that conflict. And they are doing that. They also have enormous resources. They have a national wealth fund that totals $133.4 billion as of today, on which they can draw and are drawing. It's down, I have here, about 25% over the last couple of months. And they're drawing on that to build up their armed forces and their military industry. Russia is creating a war economy. We can talk more about that in the question period, if you would like. Putin and Russia also have popular support, something like 70 to 75 to 80% or so of the Russian populace say in surveys that they support the war. And this is backed up by overall support for President Putin from the population. Also, the blue line is his popularity. And as of last December, 83% approve of the way he's doing his job, 14% disapprove, and 3%, whatever, they don't know. But, that's huge. Any Western politician would give his right arm to have that kind of approval rating. Now, ma'am.
Who's taking these surveys?
Great question. This is from the Levada Institute, Russian survey organization that is not connected to the government, but which has been classified as a foreign agent by the government, which is they're trying to put them out of business, is what they're trying to do. But so far, this is what it is. Now, nevertheless, I mean, if somebody called you up on the phone and said, and you're in Russia, do you support President Putin? Do you think he's doing a good job? Yeah. People would be hesitant to say, no, I don't. And, anything except, yeah, I support him is going to look suspicious, especially since many people, according to surveys, are aware of all the arrests like Alexei Navalny and killings like Alexei Navalny and Boris Nemtsov, and lots of opposition politicians have met their fate. People are aware of that, and so yes is the answer. Okay. Now, mind you, other surveys by the same company, by the same Levada group, have shown, though, that the level, when they ask the question a different way, do you trust President Putin? His trust levels have gone down to 33%. And that's probably partly because of all the arrests and killings. So they trust him less. So this shows maybe a little crack in what you might think might be popular support for Putin and for the war. We could talk more about that, and we will talk a little bit more about whether Putin is safe in power or not.
I have a question.
Sir.
You mentioned that Russia is building a war economy. What exactly does that mean?
A war economy means that you funnel resources that would normally go into the production of civilian goods, into military production.
Okay, so are they like building more bombs right now?
They would like to refurbish a lot of factories to do that. They are taking a lot of young people who are working in the consumer industry and are making jobs attractive in military industry. Of course, in the short term, what this does is, people are making a lot more money. Also, much more of Russian wealth is being funneled into making military stuff and sending soldiers to the front and paying them more than the young men might be able to get working elsewhere. All of this stuff means that in the short term, what we see is a Russian poverty level has actually gone down. Russian GDP has gone up. In fact, it's projected to grow 3.5% this year. Initial projections for this year were 1% or below, but because this war economy is building up, Russia's economy is getting better, stronger. Yet, that's the short term. Long term, the problem is you've got all these people earning high salaries in military industry. Where would they have been working? In the civilian side. So in the longer term, consumer goods and other kinds of products that they would have been creating are not going to be available. And that's going to create hardship. War economies always do that. There's only so many resources you got. It's a zero-sum game. And so if you put it in the military, you're taking it away from somewhere else.
The old economic theory, the inverse relationship between guns and butter.
Yeah.
You start building more guns, there's less butter.
That's right.
Hitler brought the German economy out of its doldrums in World War II by advancing both guns and butter. But the secret there was he stole all the wealth of the Jews,
Right,
which allowed him to have more guns and more butter for a while.
right,
Putin's not got that advantage.
right. Correct. Anyway, it's a short-term thing. So thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. So anyway, so this is, he's a popular guy. And, there is this kind of basic thing. Many people have said, well, the Russians have adapted kind of a muddling through attitude, just putting up with this war effort. So Russia has a lot of sources that it can bring to bear, and it's doing it now. But that doesn't mean that they're infinite by any means. Now, when we look at things at a more regional level, we can look at Russia's relationship with China, because China, of course, is of great interest to us, to Americans, and we imagine that Russia and China are being pushed together and, real buddies, and Putin and Xi Jinping are really, fast friends, and on and on and on. And it's true that Russian-Chinese relations have improved somewhat in some ways since the invasion. Chinese exports to Russia, for instance, soared 69% in 2023 compared to before the invasion. So that's quite an improvement over the last couple of years. You can get Russian chocolates in Chinese stores all over the place. The Chinese have occupied now 55% of the Russian car market. Mercedes-Benz and Audi and other companies pulled out of Russia. The showrooms where they used to show their cars are now occupied by Chinese companies. And of course, there are a lot of exports from Russia to China of gas and oil, which we'll get into in a second. But, and you knew this was coming, but relations are much more nuanced than Russia and China are becoming allies or something like that. They're not. It's really what people have called an axis of convenience. So it's convenient for Russia and China to deal with each other in the ways that I have just said and more. I look at Russian-Chinese relations like what you might call a strategic triangle. You can't look at them alone, in other words. You have to include the US and the European Union in on all of this. And the way I see things with Russian-Chinese relations isn't simply the bilateral relationship, but their bilateral relationship depends upon their relationship with the US and EU. And so over time, when we look at this, you see, say, for instance, the closer the US and China get, the further apart the US and Russia get. You remember, Nixon's, ping pong diplomacy and all that stuff. Okay, we're getting close to China. Henry Kissinger goes, and all of these strong relations under Jimmy Carter. We recognize China as the only China. I mean, all of this, and this way we were isolating the then Soviet Union. Well, now things have changed. So now you get China and Russia closer because their relations with the United States are getting further apart. But it's not even that simple. It's not even that simple. And because China depends a lot on the United States for trade. For instance, I got it here. I just found this figure. Russia isn't even in the top 20, in the top 25 trading nations with China. For the US, China is number 3. Okay. And China is the US is the number 1 importer of Chinese goods worldwide. I can remember when the first time I ever touched anything made in the People's Republic of China was when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Colorado. And I was on an exchange program. I was in Finland. We were playing volleyball. And my God, that volleyball was made in China. I mean, I'd never touched anything like, made there. This is a long time ago, 1965. And wow, the volleyball is pretty good, I just felt like, gosh, that's pretty well. Now, I challenge anybody in this room to who doesn't own something made in China. So, things have changed. But so China and the U.S. have a lot of ties. And this kind of dilutes the idea that somehow China and Russia are getting together into an alliance. It's really, really not the case. Historically speaking, and I won't go into this, China and Russia have had centuries of distrust between them. And I'll just leave it at that. And if you want to find out more about that, we can talk about that. Just to fill out this triangle, here we've got this typical kind of power distribution, where Russia is the least powerful of the three countries. And so it makes sense for China to kind of hook up, if it's going to compete with the United States, somewhat at least, with the Russians. Now, if we take a look briefly here, I can see time is going. I don't know. Do you guys usually have, say, a little bit later than 11 o'clock? I mean, I don't want to,
We usually leave when you're done.
Oh, watch out. You give a professor a microphone, you're finished. You're finished. But, if we take a look at the gas trade, I talked about energy, the energy trade between Russia and China. And natural gas is really important here. So let's just take a little look, kind of case study at natural gas, which we can do. And these are Chinese gas imports in millions of cubic meters, okay? Now, this is an interesting chart because we have Kazakhstan, Myanmar, Russia, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan as the main suppliers of natural gas to China, so it can, really get its industry going strong. Where's Russia? Russia is the brown. Okay? It's brown. And the green is Turkmenistan. So Turkmenistan is a much bigger supplier of natural gas to China than Russia is. And then you've got the other countries, too, that contribute somewhat. I'm surprised to see Kazakhstan, which is in gray, so low. But nevertheless, that's the way things are. So Russia is, of the major suppliers to China of natural gas, in second place by far. So this kind of, again, dilutes your idea of these strong ties, or shall I say, dependency relationship of China upon Russia. Moreover, and here's a little map I just thought I'd throw in here, and I did it at the last minute, just to show you what Eurasia, Central Eurasia, looks like. There are so many little countries, so many stands in there that people can get confused, but you can see China here, and it has to have natural gas pipelines to, of course, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan and so on, and they have to go through other countries to get their natural gas, and so they have a very deep interest in this territory here, which puts them in competition with Russia. because Russia has a deep interest in those countries too. So there's kind of a geopolitical jockeying going on here through some of the gas suppliers that is pretty interesting and also threatening to Russia. What's also threatening to Russia is how much money Russia can make from supplying natural gas to China. Where's Russia? At the bottom last in terms of dollars per 1,000 cubic meters. So not only are they in second place, but they're getting paid less. And this does not help the war effort, because the Chinese are great negotiators, and Russia has to sell this gas because, as we'll see here in a second, good question, this is what's happened to Russia's main customer for its natural gas. It has fallen off. This is supplies to the European Union of natural gas. And you can see what's happened since the invasion. The Europeans have stopped buying natural gas from Russia. So Russia has to have a place to, to sell it. And they're selling it to the Chinese at a discount and getting less money as a result, which is less money to fuel a war machine, which, weakens them. Yeah.
Who do you think is responsible for blowing up that pipeline from Russia to Germany?
Yeah, this is Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Probably Ukraine. That's what the best thinking is. Somebody knows the answer to this. The Swedes, of course, been very interested in this. The natural gas pipeline flowing from Russia directly to Germany.
We would have been for that also, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine. There's lots of possibilities here. The thinking I get, and I don't have access to classified information, thinking I get is that it's the Ukrainians that did it.
Officially, it's not us.
Well, no, I mean, who knows? It could have been us, but we're not sure. Somebody
pushing for Germany to get off the oil.
Correct. We were pushing for the German. We have been ever since they signed an agreement with the Soviet Union in the 70s to import Soviet natural gas. It's been U.S. policy to try to discourage that because we were afraid they would become too dependent on Russia as a supplier. But you can see what's happened here. They are not nearly as dependent on Russia as a supplier of natural gas. It's really sinking down to almost 10% now of it. And others have made it up. Others meaning liquid natural gas from the United States. We're doing it. Not only are we doing it, we are poised to be the largest liquid natural gas exporter in the world. Right now, we're behind Qatar. Qatar, by the way, also provides liquid natural gas to the European Union. But this has been a boon for American natural gas producers to get the LNG going. Plus, Norway, by the way, is when we see others, the green line on the top there, that are supplying the European Union. Norway also has a pretty good natural gas, but that's not liquid natural gas. It's by pipeline to them. So anyway, the result of all of this are the conclusions from the former head of strategy for Gazprom. Gazprom is the largest natural gas and oil producer. And he is now in Europe. He got out right after the invasion. He saw the writing on the wall. And what he has said in a study by the Carnegie Endowment is that first, Russia cannot compensate, China cannot compensate for Russia's loss of the European gas market. So this is bad news for Russia. Two, he says, the gas trade between Russia and China is likely to end by 2060 or even earlier because of the global energy transition to renewable resources. And three, he says, this puts Gazprom in a very risky position, even in the medium term, because of the cost of development, like laying more pipelines. So this is a real problem. And what it sums to is that Russia is the junior partner in its relations with China, that China cannot be depended upon. They don't provide Russia with weapons, even. So this frightening implication of the war in Ukraine doesn't really bear much for us. I mean, I think that the Chinese are not going to stand back there and become a solid ally of Russia, unquestioning one, at least, in the future. Now, for the global level, and I won't go into this too much because I've taken so much time, is the question of wheat. And we all know that the war in Ukraine meant that the Ukrainians would be blocked from shipping wheat, which is a huge contributor to their gross domestic product, through the Black Sea and the Dardanelles and down. And many of their customers are African nations, but they were blocked from doing that. Then Russia and Ukraine, with Turkey, were able to negotiate an agreement where Russia would permit some Ukrainian wheat to go out, but not a lot. Then the Russians, at the mid-year last year, reneged on that agreement and wouldn't permit any Ukrainian wheat to go out. Then the Ukrainians got angry and started bombing Russian vessels in the Black Sea and forced really a retreat of parts of the Russian Navy from one port to another. And this has been back and forth. The result of it, everybody, is that this contributes to world hunger. That Ukraine cannot export the amount of wheat that African nations in particular need. There are 350 million people worldwide who are on the brink of starvation. And many of them depended on Ukrainian wheat. Though this isn't the only reason they're starving. The Ukrainian wheat crisis, if you will, made things much, much worse for them. So in my view, this Ukrainian war has really sapped much of Russia's influence as a great power in the world. And it's done a lot even to isolate it. Given that, will Mr. Putin survive? Some of you may be wondering, is he going to survive this whole thing? Look at, So what about Russian domestic politics? What are some of the things that we could imagine coming? And this is what I'm going to end with here. What are some of the things? Well, military coup d'etat, maybe. Well, one was attempted, and we saw what happened to Mr. Prigozhin. We've already talked about that. And lesson learned for anybody who would like to do that. And of course, there's a long tradition of civilian rule anyway in Russia, civilian control over the military. Will a person arise to overthrow Putin, from inside? What's happened to the opposition? I just talked about Navalny and Boris Nemtsov and people who have really been serious competitors. And, they haven't met. I can't remember the name. Zaluzhny, Boris Zaluzhny, I think is his name. No, that isn't it. There's another guy who was wanting to run for president, but guess what? No, he's been disqualified.
Until he died.
Right. So, will there be a person? There's just nobody now, who's going to kind of rise up as kind of a charismatic leader, and you'll see Putin go bye-bye. No, that was disinformation. I don't think he has cancer. He was absent, in unexplained absence about a year ago. My interpretation of that was that his absence was a result of a botched Botox injection. Yeah.
The Hutus come into this place.
What?
The Hutus, how do they come into this place?
Oh, how do the Hutus come in? They don't. There's no relationship. I mean, the Hutus, actually, Hutu bombs in the Red Sea and around in the Middle East actually threaten Russia too, because Russia exports stuff from the Black Sea out through the Dardanelles into the Med, and they want to go through the Suez Canal. They're going to get bombed too, they're afraid. So this hurts them. This hurts them. Some people, okay, yes, sir, back there.
Is there some way,
Sorry?
is there some way that Russia
Yeah.
actually wins in Ukraine? And if so, what does this win look like?
Well, that's a good question. Let's answer the last one first. And a win would, from Russia, from Putin's statements and everything that I can read, his ideology that Ukraine was never really a country anyway, and he's got all this crazy Ukrainian history that most of it is wrong, would be to take over Ukraine completely. But how are you going to do that with 40 million people in it? You move Russian troops in, but they're going to be subject to a lot of guerrilla warfare once they get in there. Moreover, Russian resources are not unlimited. That gets to your first question. How does he do this? He would have to. I mean, it's got a war economy now, but to really, in my opinion, he doesn't have enough resources to do that. He has enough resources maybe to take the 4 or 5 provinces in eastern Ukraine, and I think it's probably the most likely outcome of this war. In other words, status quo. All this dying, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and wounded. And you're basically back to where you started. Again, those of you who have actually been in warfare might know this in a very deep way. Sir?
Sometime before the war started, Ukraine was making noise about joining NATO. And given Crimea's military strategic importance to Russia and the fact that they've occupied it and the fact that Crimea itself has a substantial amount of ethnic Russians living there.
Yep.
It just seems to me that this might be a gambit that, when they finally come to the table, Putin says, just give me Crimea and we're done. He wins.
Well, I don't know. When you look at what they went in, they had no idea what the hell they were doing. Let's face it, the Russians really didn't know what they were doing. At least not very well. They already had Crimea, right? So why invade? Why invade Ukraine proper, so to speak? And there are these provinces that are there that are mostly Russian-speaking in the eastern part of Ukraine. As you move across Ukraine, Russian is less and less used publicly as you move to the west. But I got in my mind off the question. What was it again?
Well, it's all about Ukraine.
NATO.
And NATO.
Oh, NATO. Okay. Yeah, NATO. Okay. Yeah. So
NATO. Now all of a sudden.
oh well, no. There's first of all, and that may have been a threat to Russia. Of course, it would have been a threat had NATO been able to do it. But Ukrainian membership in NATO was far away, far, far away, even without a Russian invasion. And now with the Russian invasion, it's probably even further away. Because if Ukraine were to join NATO, guess what? We'd have to go to war with Russia. We don't want to do that. Yeah.
What happens if the Russians successfully assassinate Zelensky? Who are the next people in line?
Well, I think, yeah. The name Zaluzhny is the one I was thinking of before, and that's actually the name of a Ukrainian general who's more popular than Zelensky is. So there are people there that can replace Zelensky. He's got some political problems at home, to be sure. But of course, during wartime like this, I mean, he called off elections, which is not a very democratic thing to do. Countries have had elections during wartime. So, things are difficult. So there are people, back there.
Since history has a tendency to repeat itself, what we're talking about here is reminiscence of the 20s and the 30s with Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And they got desperate
Yeah.
because of natural resources and being backed up against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Putin's got an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction.
Yep.
When does he become, what's your opinion on his becoming really desperate? And, with his back, he has nothing to lose. At what point does he have nothing to lose and taking on the West to regain Russia's dominance?
Well, Putin may be desperate, but he's not crazy. He's not crazy. He understands what would happen with nuclear weapons, as do most of you here. I mean, he wants to use nuclear weapons, even tactical nukes, which probably would be a waste anyway. But if he were to, really seriously threaten with nukes, he's talked about it, but anyway. If he were to use nuclear weapons, Russia would be wiped out too. And he knows that. I don't see, obviously he wants to use the war to help his power. He's got elections coming up in March, right? And he wants to use his popularity to show everybody that he's a really cool guy and everybody loves him. But he's not going to use nuclear weapons to do any of that because there would cease to be Moscow. There would cease to be St. Petersburg. There would cease, not only those places, but all around the world.
Let me just interrupt, if you mind. I would love to give Luba a chance to give her thoughts on all this as we
Sure.
from Ukraine and the impact on your parents and everyone.
And I'm lucky I speak English.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. And Professor will correct me on any scientific point of view if I get it wrong. I might be a little bit emotional because a lot of time I speak maybe about this from the heart. And when I read social media and when I talk to my mom, who called yesterday and kind of said goodbye if anything happens, because Putin just moved 48 huge machines to the border, and her region where she lives with the military headquarters and police headquarters are in Kiev, and Darnitsa we're expected to be hammered. And I don't know what's going on right now there, but she just told me where the keys are and kind of where documents are. And just if anything, that I stay the main person in the family. And I was like, yeah, just don't even talk about it. Like, let's just get through the weekend.
Why not move over toward the middle?
Okay, is this a microphone or do I need it or okay? So it's hard at the times here in Broomfield just live and understand how surreal is there, because I know my mom is a hero and she was there at the stage when even Yatsenyuk and presidents during Orange Revolution left because snipers started to take people off Maidan, and she and other 5 men stepped out, and she never told me because I didn't want my mom to die on the stage on Maidan, so she kind of told me later. But she's been known for that in Kiev, so she's a hero. But even now, her voice is kind of not cracking, but it's tough. And at some point, I'll tell you our way to the States, which took a year through Moldova, Romania, and Georgia. Batumi, we were spent a year with the kids trying to get out. But what I want to use this opportunity to really say two things: who we were and who we want to be. These are crucial things to us. We were there a long time. We were there for thousands of years. We were not as Asian as Greece, but we're pretty old, and we accepted Christianity in somewhere before 1000 AD, and we were breadbasket for Rome. We continue to be breadbasket for more maybe different countries. And we were part of Soviet Union, and I went to school in St. Petersburg. I know Russians. I have a lot of friends in Russia, and I love Russian people. As a Ukrainian, I can say that. We never hated them. We never thought they're bad people. And I continue to watch Rocky and cry what he did. To me, Sylvester Stallone is still my hero because I cannot not cry watch that movie when he won the crowd in a country where they had their own hero. So what's going on to us is a big shock. When I woke up on 2 years ago, my concierge called me and said, Luba, get up, get the kids ready, the war started. These were the war in 1941, when the war started and Germans crossed Ukraine, actually. And I was like, Natasha, you had cognac yesterday. What war? What kids? She's like, Luba Vladimirovna, I repeat, I have a lot of people to call. Get up, get ready, go to the basement and watch the air raids. It was a tough one, but Ukrainian people got rid of communists. We got rid of Kuchma. We got rid of Yanukovych. We got rid of, we really kind of tried to survive in the Yushchenko's. And then there's this huge pool of unknownness. Where do we go? We don't want to be developing a military economy along with Putin. Where do we go? We are not accepted into NATO because Angela Merkel and whoever was the French president at that time said, no, not Ukrainians. We don't want them. No. Where do we go? We're bordering Russia. We're bordering Poland. And back then, we were slaughtered by Russians for joining Poland. And now Polish, we don't know why, opening our grain trains and pouring it on the streets.
Right.
And I don't know what this is. That's a big secret right now. It's
Polish farmers are threatened. That's what's going on.
Oh, okay. Maybe thank you for clarification, because yesterday my hands were shaking. We dying there under bullets to collect that grain to pass through Poland, which the only gate we have to Europe, to whatever the African countries or wherever it goes. And they just sliding and opening the wagons and letting the grain pour on the railways and stopping the trains. And all our artists, all our media going by, which is like shame on Poland. So we stuck between these two, hard in the rock place, and like, where do we go? Nobody wants us. I was at some point trying to bring human resources part of it. I signed up without permission of all my bosses. The contract was Harvard, just to send 30 young people who now ministers of finance in Ukraine to Harvard, to Kennedy School. So they know how to run the country. I thought I'm going to be say you bad girl, but no, actually I got away. They said you good girl. Okay, I'm like, okay. But I think the biggest challenge Ukraine is facing right now, we have no men left to fight. The war is not the answer. Villages are ghost towns. Men are killed. Women left with the kids to Poland or Europe or Germany. 70% of Ukrainians actually left to Russian because they don't speak English, or German or Hungarian or whatever other language. They just need to get out of the war zone. I think the biggest problem of Ukraine right now is bridging the human resource factor. We have no leaders. I appreciate this Zaluzhny. He's a military guy. And with all due respect to military people, they're not accountants, they're not finance people, they're true men. They're real men. They're men ready to die for their country. They're patriots. But we need more than that. We need resources with people who know how to establish institutions and run them, how to run the institutions of a democratic society. And we don't have any. We have no. We're plowers. We plow land. We give grain to world, but we don't know how to run the country. And when Zelensky came in, I voted for him. Why? Because all his campaign was built on the fact he's going to teach all the Ukrainians how to run democratic society because we already got rid of the bad guys. Well, how do we do the good job now? We don't know how. And I've been through this. In the 90s, when I came to States, when I was driving in the cab, I said, I'm from Ukraine. The cab driver woman turned and I said, oh, is that somewhere in Germany? Did that piss me off? What do you think? So neither world knows about us. No, we know about world. We need people who will teach us. Like when I came to States, my boss at Ernst & Young taught me how to speak English, how to write without mistakes, what the memo is, how to carry a thought across, what are the right ways to approach, say things, explain things, and how to hold frustration when things not getting done. You guys know all of that. You know that from the very little age, because your country built this great country, this great economy. We don't know that. We only stuck between Russia and Polish people who, with all due respect to Poland, there were a lot of time in history where they mocked at us and killed us just like Russians.
Yep.
So we need to get out of that little balloon. We're sitting in the balloon choking and the world seeing us die. We don't want to be extinct. Today at 12 by Capitol in Denver, there is a meeting. Like around the world, today is a day where all Ukrainians come out to say we don't want to be extinct. And the question is not about Putin. Putin would never invented the country if we knew how to run our own country. It's on us. It's our responsibility to run our country. It's our responsibility to have our own finance, not to drain your budget or budget of other European countries. But we need to know how to run that money and how to spend them the right way, how to fight corruption. We are known to be one of the most corrupted countries in the world. And when I drive in Kiev and I see all those, girls with lips like that and with lashes like that, with their Mercedeses, with our government, I am not only upset, I want to kill my own government. I want to kill Russians. I want to kill them. And every Ukrainian person is right now asking when those bastards are going to be off. And we know even during the war, they do that. And we know there's a lot of them. One of my friends that co-sponsored, he gave me the contract to sign for government. I said, how do we, I met him on the street in Kiev once and I said, Roman, how do we redo this? He said, the tree is dry. We can only cut it. You cannot reinstate this tree. The tree of bureaucracy in Ukraine has to be just like very low to the land, cut it and removed. And then now we in the point exactly where me and Roman talk, and where do we get people? We don't have people. We don't have people who, without lips, all our women with lips.
Okay. Thank you. Люба, спасибо огромное.
Oh, спасибо вам. По-русски. I'm Russian speaking. Ukrainian, I speak Ukrainian freely, but and Kamardjoba.
Da, Kamardjoba. That means hi in Georgian. Sir.
Isn't most of the fighting taking place where the Russian-speaking areas are?
Yes. Yeah, and what's interesting is that you would imagine that Russia would find lots of support among those Russian-speaking people, and that's not necessarily the case at all. In fact, the invasion actually unified those Russian-speaking people, some of them anyway, much more with the Ukrainian government than they were with the Russian government. So many atrocities, taking children and trying to Russify them, the Russian soldiers. That's crazy stuff. It's also so much against international law that, that's a different subject, sir.
One thing we have not touched upon at all in this conversation is the U.S. Congress.
Oh,
And which one of our
I wonder why that.
presidential candidates, if he wins, he's going to wrap Ukraine up and give it to Putin as a present.
Yeah.
He's already announced that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
know.
will save Putin if that happens.
Well, there's two things going on here. One is the Congress, which is it's just crazy.
Which is answering to Putin.
Yeah.
Answering to Trump.
Trump, I know, but it's without getting too much into politics.
There's no way to.
I think there is no doubt that the U.S. Congress, especially the House of Representatives, is dysfunctional. They can't choose a leader in a proper way. They can't, that they've chosen now a majority leader a Speaker of the House who is so inexperienced. Anyway, so there's a problem there, and of course they're holding up Ukraine aid for the totally unrelated demand of solving the border crisis, by the way, which there is obviously a border problem. And then as soon as the Senate passes the border like they want it, then they refuse to do it. It's just beyond me. So there's a problem there, and ex-President Trump, also, shall I say, to put it gently, isn't very knowledgeable about world affairs. And the big contrast is with Biden, who really is. But so that's as far as I'm going to go on that. Sir?
I think that Ukraine is fighting Russia for us.
Ukraine is what?
It's fighting for us.
Oh, yeah, they are.
We don't have to send our people over there. It doesn't turn into another Vietnam for us.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. And,
we end it. How do we help enough such that the Russians finally decide continuing it is no longer supportable? But they don't seem to be close to that.
The way we end it is by providing aid with a lot more aid to Ukraine from a position of strength, or at least equivalence. And then there are going to be negotiations. All wars end with negotiations of some sort. And so, there's got to be negotiations. And when neither side wants to negotiate, Zelensky says he doesn't want to, Putin says he doesn't want to. That's a real problem now. I'm sure that we have contacts with the Putin administration and with Zelensky about this very issue. I'm sure we do.
But we have to have a position of strength to make it.
Correct. We have to have a position of strength to make it work.
And right now, we're not giving them what they need.
That is correct. That is correct.
Funneling weapons.
What?
I thought we were funneling weapons.
Well, we have been giving them weapons, but the question is, and now their Ukrainian forces apparently, I only know what I read in the papers, apparently are suffering from a lack of ammunition, which we could provide right away.
If the government decides, if the Congress decides.
If the Congress decides to fund it. And right now they've got this, it's hard to put into words.
Who is the one person in this world that Trump has never criticized? Putin.
Oh, yeah. Well,
That's the answer.
there's a problem there. He seems to have an affinity
Well,
for.
the one thing which also makes U.S. support so critical is what has enabled the Ukrainians to be very effective on the battlefield is a bunch of the sophisticated weapons we're provided. HIMARS
Yes.
and a
Right,
variety
and
of
Biden's
others,
slowed
have
that down,
allowed
too.
them to essentially decimate, mechanized forces. And this whole new world of, what do we call them, the cheap little drone things. But you do need bullets, you do need even basic artillery, and when you don't have it, you can no longer defend significant parts of your area. The Russians,
The Ukrainian army's down to 20 bullets a day per person.
Yes.
My question to you is about the European Union. If Ukraine could join the European Union,
That's good.
Yes.
that would help them.
Yes.
In fact, very
And
much.
that's even bigger than going into NATO.
That is, you may want to comment.
Yeah, at the time we were working with Harvard, I also was part of the program with the UK, where the Prime Minister Cabinet did a lot of programs for UK on that side, on the public servant side.
Yeah.
Trying to bring all this government kind of culture, proper government culture, proper public servant, as they call it, culture into Ukraine. New, non-corrupt, government who is not driven and not dependent on the businesses they have on the side to draw from the budget.
Right.
Natalia Yaresko, who was an Ukrainian American, who was minister for a very short time, because all she could say, she looked at the accounts and she said, "Where's the money?" I remember her saying in Ukrainian Rada, which is parliament, like, if you give me the source where the tax when the tax for people gonna come in, then I will tell you how to spend it in a non-corrupt way. But where is the taxes? People don't pay taxes because they don't believe government. They all have businesses, but they don't pay taxes. So the whole machine of normal tax collection has to start functioning properly to fill in the budget, to feed the new type of government officials who are non-corrupt.
Right.
All of this is, as I said, from a farming standpoint, it's a field that never been plowed in Ukraine. And whatever help can be there from your IRS, from your specialists, from your agency, from your experts, I would hammer, and actually, in the most European way. I mean, we were brought up, we were beaten at home, from time to time. We were not like right now, like you can't beat the kids. Like sometimes we would get beaten with stick or belt and that, well, the Ukrainians right now need to be beaten in that area, in the area of tax collections.
The European Union would.
And I hope Europeans and Germans are very good about it.
Yes.
So I would hope, and UK people English. So I would say if they can pour there and introduce that strict discipline. And in my heart, this administration of Zelensky, they've been through a lot. So.
But you've got to stop the military assault.
Yeah, but you gotta supply people who know how to use the advanced weapons we're offering them.
Ukrainians are not like that, because right now they don't want to even fight. They've lost belief into the fairness of this war.
Well, I think
And in the beginning, they were fighting against Russians as a patriots. Now, when they look that the parties continue, when they look that nothing changes, Putin already took what he wanted. He's kind of shelling it from time to time, like whatever, just a couple of, maybe 50 rockets today. Tomorrow, maybe 100.
Nuclear energy.
So he's not assaulting anymore. There's that front line that's been frozen for a year. The war was over a year and a half ago, the real war. It was only 6 months. When he took what he wanted, he got access to the Black Sea. The rest of it is just shelling. And a lot of people return to Ukraine to live under shelling because they don't want anybody to move in. And they're sitting there for a year under shells thinking, so what's next?
Well, the infrastructure is just being destroyed around itself.
And as Europeans come to repair it, say it's so old-fashioned, it's so easy to, Ukrainians are lucky. It's a very old-fashioned energy plants. They're very easy to fix. We were without energy when he hit majority of infrastructure for maybe 2 months. And after that, we never had energy problem because it's so basic. Problem
is with the people. Like right now, while all of this assault is going on, I think if we were able to demonstrate to European Union, to United States, to Canada, to Britain, to Australia, to all the Western world, that we're trustworthy, that there is no corruption, I think Putin will go party to China. He'll say, I'm done. He doesn't need all of that Kievska Rus from the Saint Vladimir's time when we got baptized. I don't believe he has any strategic vision of central Russia. Plus, Kiev is extremely European, extremely beautiful, with opera houses, with monuments, with it's like big Prague in a way. So I don't think Putin really, I mean, he cannot stop because that means that he'll lose the war. But I think he'll keep doing it until, as Ukrainians, we will prove to the world that we're self-sustaining. And as soon as we start resolving our human resources factor and have all that proper government, functioning government in place, I think all Italians, all Europe say, that's fine. Let's really do Putin.
Yeah.
Because right now it's just like, let's support and see what Ukrainians are going to say. Well, we're saying that we don't know. Like, I know, but I'm maybe unique. The rest of them don't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And Professor Hudson, thank you.
All right.
again for-
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Oh, great. All right.